Welcome to Assessing Risks for Startups, a webinar brought to you by the Catalyst Fund. We're going to start with some house rules to begin with. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with webinars, but just in case, I want to remind you that our session will be approximately 1 hour long. You can pose questions and comments. In fact, we encourage that at any time during the session by clicking the Q&A tab at the bottom of the webinar screen. You'll see it right there on the screenshot. And we'll do our best to respond to your questions during and also at the end of the webinar. So there'll be time, of course, at the end of the session to ask all of the questions that come to mind. Today's webinar is also being recorded, so I wanted to mention that. And the link of the recording will be shared after the event with everybody, in case you loved it so much you want to watch it again. So let's start then. Today's presenters are myself. I'm going to act a bit as a moderator. My name is Maylise Carraro, and I'm the program manager of Catalyst Fund. And work for BFA, who's a consulting firm specialized in fintech and financial inclusion, and the manager of the fund. And with us today, we have Jonathan Duarte, the CEO of Escala Educacion. Welcome, Jonathan. And also Jane Delcer, who's our member of our team, a senior associate at BFA for the Insights and Influence, and also manages all the learning and insights and communication tools of the Catalyst Fund. But before we get into telling you more about us, let's hear about yourselves. So who's in the audience and why are you attending this webinar? There's going to be a poll appearing on the screen. So we're going to ask you to click on your answer and give you a couple of minutes to do so and show you the results. Please go ahead and vote. I hope you can all see the poll. Great, it looks like we have many entrepreneurs in the room, and a lot of you are interested to learn about risk management for your own company or about risks for fintech companies in general. So let me see.
Just want to make sure, is everyone seeing the presentation okay? If you're having any issues, could you let us know via the chat interface if you're able to see the presentation in a normal format?
Okay, well, let's share the results. So we have entrepreneurs in the room, and as I said, many of you are interested about risk management in general and learning about risk for fintech companies, so looks like you're in the right place. Let's continue. So first, for those of you that are not familiar, I wanted to share a bit more about Catalyst Fund. So Catalyst Fund is a global accelerator program supporting early stage fintech startups to foster innovation in financial inclusion in emerging markets. And in the context of financial inclusion, we're really bullish that fintech and fintech solutions hold a boundless potential to use digital tools to provide financial services to low-income demographics with greater speed, accountability, and efficiency to lower income customers. Yet, what we see is that many of our inclusive fintech companies are actually yet to reach scale across these markets, and we'll need hundreds of them to really truly improve the financial health of customers in those markets. And the truth is that there are many innovative ideas out there, but many often fail to see the light of day and never go past the PowerPoint deck stage because they lack essential things for the growth and development. And we're going to speak, that's exactly why we're having this webinar today. So investors often complain that many times they would see entrepreneurs with innovative ideas, but they're just a little bit too early and too risky for them to invest. So Catalyst Fund, funded by the Gates Foundation and JP Morgan, was developed to address a common problem that we see with the early stage startups. They have a hard time securing capital, as I just mentioned, and also the expertise they need to complete and test their products in market. Obviously, this limits innovation and the potential of impact of new solutions that leverage technology for financial inclusion. So there's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem here. Companies can raise money without the right team, but they can't afford the right team without raising money. And Catalyst Fund, therefore, brought together a group of investors, impact investors and commercial investors as well. And with the grant capital from the donors, provides a solution that includes grants, tailored advice from BFA, a specialized consulting firm, and mentorship by the investors to really support these companies in refining and testing their products, and then eventually get to scale. So far we've worked with 15 companies, and we'll get to 20 by the end of 2018 across Latin America, East and Sub-Saharan Africa, and also Asia, especially India in particular. So our theory of change in terms of de-risking really includes the following steps. So first, the startups are sponsored by a member of the investor committee that you just saw in the previous slide. So a member nominates an early stage fintech company that they think has a lot of potential, but is just, needs a little bit more proof points to be investment ready. And then we support them as soon as they're part of Catalyst Fund with technical assistance by BFA, who brings deep tech and emerging market and financial services expertise. And they also receive mentorship by the investor committee. And we provide events and peer learning on top of the grant funding, of course. And then to facilitate and of course, increase the chances that startups can get connected to investors, we also facilitate the connections with the members of the committee, and we also created a circle of investors, which is a broader group that gets to watch the progress of the companies and be introduced to those that match their investment criteria. And then finally, if all of this works, in principle, then the startup can raise follow-on funding and also reduce the risks that it faces. So what are exactly the most common risks that startups face? So as I said earlier, the common denominator is, of course, funding capital and human capital. And those two are the major traps, and most obvious as well, and the most spoken about. But there's also other risks that startups face every day and need to work on. One of those is obviously product market fit, and funding and getting a team with the right skill sets is a precondition, of course, to testing the product and make sure it's right for the market. And also, for example, technology risks and data risks. Oftentimes, the technologies are not tested in certain markets, and there's not enough data to really refine the product and also make better business decisions. And also execution in terms of knowing what to prioritize and setting KPIs is obviously a very high risk for early stage companies. And then finally, you also have external risks that you can see here, like legal and regulatory or ecosystem infrastructure risks, timing. And my colleague Jane will go in detail into what each of those categories is and what we're observing through our risk assessment toolkit in a minute. But before we dive into that, I want to hear from Jonathan a bit more about how you're dealing every day with risks and how you've managed them. So Jonathan was part of our first very cohort at Catalyst Fund, and he works in Colombia. So let's hear a bit more about Escala. Jonathan, can you hear us? Sounds like there's...
Hi, can you hear me?
You are. Yes, I can now. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for joining us today. Do you want to tell the audience a bit more about Escala?
Sure. So Escala is a social enterprise that seeks to promote social mobility in Colombia through savings and access to higher education. And we do this by offering savings plans for higher education as a company benefit. We've been doing this. We started working on our idea back in 2012 as part of our MBA experience, and decided to take a jump into building the business in 2015 and launched commercially in 2016.
Fantastic. And you've made a lot of progress since the first time that we met and started working together through Catalyst Fund. So I wanted you to tell the audience a bit more about what were the risks that you were facing then, so about a year and some ago, and also then today. This is a snapshot of how you answered your risk diagnostic toolkit back then when you joined Catalyst. So can you give us a sense of what have been the biggest risks you faced in Colombia?
Yeah, so definitely number one, it's around legal and regulatory framework. Our product works in the intersection of three very traditional and not very innovative, let's call them industries or sectors, which is higher education, financial services, and we've even had to get into human capital or human resources. And so it's been really, it was really difficult. I think we've managed to lower that, but it was the legal and the regulatory framework around those three has always been really tough. In terms of fintech startups in Colombia, there's still a lot of things that we need to do in terms of our legal framework. For example, we still need a physical signature and from a person, so that a person can open an investment account or a long-term savings account, which adds a lot of problems into not problems, but it adds a lot of physical work that needs to get done. Also, there are a lot of requirements in order to open one of these accounts. And so working through that in order to bring a fairly sophisticated and highly intensive product to a very, to the masses has not been the easiest. It's also very expensive to be an entrepreneur in Colombia. There's a lot of hoops that you need to jump. There's a lot of paperwork that you need to fill out, even if you're making very little revenue and you're very small. So a lot of that has definitely been a challenge. In terms of our product, this is a very innovative product because we a little bit more about that. So we ask people to save through payroll deduction, and then we ask the companies to match those savings and making sure that money only goes for higher education. And so that hadn't been done before in Colombia. Colombia and the rest of Latin America is known for not saving, for not having savings behavior. And so we really didn't know if there was going to be a product market fit in terms of end users or end customers. But also we didn't know if the companies were going to be willing to put these matching funds either. And so there was a lot of risk around that that we needed to work through in order to, but we knew that we needed both players in order to make sure that our product worked. And then in terms of tech and data, we were really running on Excel when we started working with Catalyst. Getting any data point was just a hassle because we needed to pull data from different sources, and so it was really difficult to get all of that going. We were just starting, so I guess we had other priorities at the moment. But that was definitely a big risk at that time.
Of course. So it sounds like it's really a number of things. There isn't really a one risk that is a break it or make it. So I'm curious, what was your sponsoring investor telling you when they sponsored you to the fund in terms of milestone that you needed to work on, or particularly de-risking propositions?
Yeah, I think in general, our sponsor needed to get more comfortable with what we were doing. Later on, we actually went to one of their global summits, and we were the only ones working in savings or wealth management. Everyone else was working on some sort of credit product or credit process type of product, you know? And so credit, in terms of financial inclusion, credit is kind of like the big line, and everyone's really comfortable understanding that. When it comes to savings, there's not much that's been done. And so I feel like that was a big thing that they wanted to get comfortable around. They wanted to see more traction. They wanted to see how we were going to solve how we were going to, use technology to scale. And so I think there were a couple things there that all very related to the risks that we were facing at the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you, Jonathan. So Jane, let's turn to you now. And I'm curious for you to tell us more about how does Escala's Fund exactly help companies like Escala Educacion identify and tackle these risks? What is our risk framework and how does it work?
Hi, Maëlys. Thanks so much. Sure, I'm very pleased to be here today and talk to you about the risk framework. Basically, we've designed it to be a focusing device. We know entrepreneurs have many decisions, a lot of situations that they're dealing with, and decisions that need to be made while they're building a business, right? While they're running and building it at the same time. And so this framework is about being able to lay it all out in one place, right? We can either do it in the form of a workshop, or we have the self-assessment tool online that puts all the factors, both the internal and the external risks, in one place. So I'm going to walk you through a quick demo. We have the internal risks, right, which are comprised of product market fit, execution, fundraising, tech and data, team culture, mission fit. As you saw, those are some of the factors that were mapped out in Jonathan's profile. And then we also have the external risks. These are the macroeconomic, timing, ecosystem, legal and regulatory factors that make up the external risk. And by going through that set of factors and measuring yourself on those factors, we're able to give you a profile, a measure, a score of your risk landscape, and then specific strategies that you can go through in order to address them. And so this is designed to be an hour to 30-minute survey that you could do alone or with your team, but it's the mapping of this, of the different factors, and then understanding how to prioritize, and from there to act on in order to manage your risks. So let me just take you through the diagnostic tool so you have a sense of how it works and how you can use it, because this is available online. So we have the internal risks. The internal risks are about the kinds of risks that you can control in your organization. You have direct control. They're usually operational. And so they are about how you choose to execute and do certain activities in your firm. So let me just move over to the online tool so you can see that and get a sense of what's actually in the diagnostic. So now you should be seeing, let me know if you don't, but now you should be seeing my other screen, which is the internal diagnostic. And you can see the questions that we ask. If you're looking at product market fit, we're asking you about how well you understand the customers and their problems, how well your value proposition is understood with respect to your customers, how you do product management, right? That's the process that you apply in order to get to product market fit and understanding your customers. And then we also ask you questions like the likelihood of this risk, the frequency, how severe these risks are, to get and also the effort of mitigating it, to get a sense of how these risks rank. And you'll see how that looks later. So that's the set of internal risks. You can go further down and see how we break down the other risks like execution, I'm just going to go through it quickly because you can look at this later, but you'll see how basically there are sub-questions that are addressing each risk category. So tech and data, and then we also have the team culture, and then mission, the fundraising, and finally the mission and impact. And so for the external risks, which are about risks that you don't necessarily control, but that you need to be aware of. Right? Be aware so that you can be informed, you can make decisions, and you can also prepare. Sometimes it involves pivoting your organization, or it involves reconsidering the timing and how you approach rolling out your business. So macroeconomics is one where it helps you look at the larger picture, the conditions that you're operating in. So Jonathan spoke to that before of operating in an environment like Colombia. And these are some of the questions that help you really get into understanding what that market looks like. Being able to answer something like your total or serviceable market, looking at the economic or political conditions. So let me just go quickly through that so you can see some of the other factors like timing. So are you going in too early or too late? Does the market show signs that they're ready for your product? And the ecosystem with respect to infrastructure. And then questions about the legal and regulatory environment, which will impact, especially in the fintech sector, how quickly or how able you are to do what you want to do with technology. So those are the external factors. And so by going through this diagnostic, that brings you to a risk profile. So let me just go into that more carefully. I'm going to go back to our presentation. So I just want to make sure everyone's seeing that. I'm not sure that everyone is seeing that. Yeah. Okay. So now you should be seeing our, we're back to the risk diagnostic where I left off. And let me just jump to the risk diagnostic. Once you've answered the survey, then you would see something like this, right? This is the snapshot of your risk profile. And just to walk you through that, you first see your risk score, right? This is to give you a sense of where you measure up. A lower score is a better score. It means you have less risk, and a higher score means higher risk. And so it's to give you a sense. For example, this is something I did of how I assessed my organization, and I felt that I was dealing with, I was in the middle, right? You can also see from this page the top risks, where they lie with respect to different priorities. So in quadrant 1, these are the risks that are priority for you. They need to be actively monitored and mitigated. You can see the 3 that are most important. In the other quadrants, you also see the risks that are that can be mitigated by insurance, say in quadrant 2, or that could be mitigated through changes in how you do something in your behavior. Quadrant 4 is about risks that you want to be aware of, but you probably don't need to act on now. So we talked about making this actionable for the for someone who's taking this assessment. And so we want you to be able to walk away with the sense of the top risks that you need to prioritize. In my case, I had regulatory risk, tech risk, and customer risk. And this is mapped to, if you're in the online diagnostic, you can click on it. It's mapped to mitigation strategies. So if you said, for example, product market fit was a priority risk, then what we come back with is a set of mitigation strategies that you can apply in order to manage this risk. And the reason why we did this was when we spoke with our CEOs, that what we found was that it was really important for them to be able to see this picture, right? To get this whole snapshot and go through the exercise of thinking through the risks in a systematic way. But it was also equally important to be able to take action, right? It wasn't enough just to say, okay, here's my sense of what my risks are, but what? Now what? And so that's what this is designed around, is what are specific actions you take both internally and externally in order to address those risks. Okay, so I'm going to just pass it on now to Mylis. She's going to share how we intervened with the different companies and managed risk.
Thank you, Jane, for walking us through our diagnostic. Super interesting. When I was starting my own startup that also actually was working in Colombia, I wished I had this tool, selfishly. But let's see what difference that does it actually make, right? And how Catalyst Fund thinks about the mitigation strategies to design also the technical assistance interventions that support the startups. So we've done an analysis of how companies were assessing the levels of risks before and after Catalyst. So what you're seeing in this graph is actually the change in risk. So green, a negative number, is actually positive. It means the risk has reduced. 0, no change. And 1 or 2 means that the risk has increased. And so obviously it's negative, and that's why it's in red out there. And there's a number of reasons, obviously, that are, because of external factors, so outside of our control. But what we saw is that a program like Catalyst really made a difference in reducing risks on the product market fit category and the tech and data category. In fact, we see most green is clustered around those 2 risks. And also somewhat on execution, really helping the companies focus on their priorities, organizing goals and objectives, and execute on their roadmap to get to product market fit. However, when we look at external barriers, that's where obviously a program like this can't really make a difference. So this is more because of market dynamics that have changed, or new ecosystem infrastructure that was put in place, or perhaps legal and regulatory barriers that have emerged, or new laws that have been introduced that can facilitate actually life for a startup. So you see here it's mostly no change, or sometimes actually increased risks as the startups start growing and scaling. And that's pretty common, especially when they begin expanding into new countries, and you see that legal and regulatory risks increase, and you start to figure out the legal systems in new countries as well. So Jonathan, let me get back to you and ask you, we've done a little bit of analysis here, you can see probably for the first time, of your own profile and how risks have changed for you based on what you told us. So can you tell us a bit more about your impressions of how you've managed risks throughout the process with Catalyst? What have we done together to de-risk some of the areas that you had previously identified as very risky? And what's happening now? Like where's Escala at?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of legal and regulatory, I think the reason why we see the decrease is more around understanding the rules, understanding more where the line is drawn, and how can we work within all of those things, and being more creative around where we were. We had 2 people specifically from BFA working with us, and one of them, she used to work in the financial system, one of the largest banks in Colombia, working in financial inclusion. So it was really great to get a lot of her thoughts around understanding a lot of those rules and where we could play and make it better. I think that's probably why we see a lot of this stuff. And we started getting very creative in a sense of asking more questions, not just taking everything for granted, and really understanding the regulation in order to bring this down. And at the same time, the answers to those questions will make us a lot more efficient, or us being able to find a better product market fit. In terms of tech and data, when the other person that we work closely with, he was very tech heavy. He used to be a CTO for a startup, and he came down to Colombia for a couple of weeks to help us transition from very basic Excel to a more robust technology infrastructure to manage data, to manage systems, to automate some of our processes, but doing it without creating a lot of work for us, without being too sophisticated either. I think that was a risk that we were running. For example, just very simple example, we were just starting to, we decided we needed a CRM, and we had consulted a friend in Silicon Valley, and he's like, you should go for Salesforce. And so we were going down a path of getting Salesforce as our first CRM, and we were going to spend $10,000 on that when we started our whole engagement with BFA, with Catalyst Fund, that was my first question. And the first thing Javi said was, stop that, like, don't do that. That's way too robust for what you need right now. And we were able to get the same requirements that we needed for, you know, a tenth of the price for a yearly subscription. So it was great, and we kind of built out the basic roadmap of where we needed to be in a year, where we needed to be in 24 months, and so that piece of the puzzle was highly risk, and I think that also helped with our execution. Again, a lot of our processes were very manual. That's when we started a lot of the automation of processes, working off of data as opposed to intuition, solving issues within the different paths of the customer journey, which was another thing that got complemented with the tech data. That was another piece that we worked on a lot, the customer journey, understanding from the moment that we were engaging with a company, to selling to their employees, to how the people interacted with us when they were already customers, and so that helped us get a very broad sense, or a very detailed sense, I mean, of how our customers behaved, when they were dropping off, if they were dropping off, when were they the most happy, when were they most unhappy. And start building tools and start, building up our value proposition and starting working in a better way to serve them. And so I feel that's probably why we see the execution coming down significantly, because even though we did that some time ago, that's part of it's part of our DNA now. I feel like everyone in the company talks about customer journey, and we're redoing customer journeys all the time when we're digging deeper into solving a problem or to solving an inefficiency. So that's been really great.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan, for sharing that with us. So we want to talk a little bit more about, this was one example of how we worked with Jonathan and his company managing his set of risks. What we saw about product market fit and value proposition, that was one of the top risks. And the way we do that with our firms is we really help them get into the customer insights. BFA brings deep expertise in financial services and working with the low-income customer in these markets. And so we bring our research team to uncover those behaviors and what the financial lives of these customers look like. We also have a product market and trust toolkit. So let me just show you that. If you are looking for other materials that are about developing customer trust, you can take a look at this toolkit that we also have online, and that really breaks down the principles of trust creation by demonstrating or creating principles like competence, appearance, control, transparency, and commitment along the customer's journey with you and your product.
And Jane, this is something that we actually also worked with Jonathan on when we were doing this customer journey. Right, Jonathan? We looked at where are ways in which you could increase trust with the customers, points in the journey where you might be destroying trust, and especially as you think about digitizing more and being more automated. Those are things that we're definitely looking at, and that's why we developed that toolkit as well.
Great. Thank you, Miley. And we also have the product market fit toolkit, which is not public yet. That's in progress. But it's another one of the tools that you could access to work on understanding value proposition and your customer. And so, as you saw, another way that we help with our companies in fundraising, the other top risk, is that we have first of all, they go through a process where they're working with a sponsored investor that ultimately at the end of the experience is ready to invest in this company, but we also connect them to a larger network of investors called our circle. So the circle, the Catalyst Fund Circle, is about 30, well, now it's over 30 institutional investors. And here's a sampling of the kinds of connections that we have in our network. And they have first right. They have access to the Catalyst Fund companies as they graduate, and ideally are a follow-on funder. And so here's a sampling of some of the other risks that our companies were dealing with, the team dynamics and culture. We worked with them to identify the kind of tech and product skills they need to have to build the right teams, and when, right? It's when do you need that product manager? When do you need that CTO? Or should the CEO be that CTO? Also about technology, understanding, as you heard in Jonathan's case, do we need to parachute in a CTO to help the firm think through the operational side of their technology and the product side of their technology? We also work with data and helping the companies understand their own data, how to build better data sets, and ultimately use that towards applications like machine learning as AI grows in this space. And finally, execution is about strategic planning and helping our teams make the right decisions so that as they go from idea to product market fit to ultimately scale, they're making the right decisions along the way. So the Risk Toolkit is one example of how we are helping the companies run better businesses. So the last note here, this is a proof of concept and validation of our work, which is that Escala, as a result of going through Catalyst Fund, along their funding trajectory, came out of that process with raising funding from Accion. What's interesting is that, raising funding from this was actually the one with Accion and Quino Capital, at least?
Yeah, Accion Venture Lab.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's a demonstration of how a company like Escala goes through Catalyst Fund and comes out of that process with further more investment. Whereas having gone into the process, that was one of the goals going into Catalyst Fund.
That's actually what we wanted to hear from you, Jonathan. So I shared this article that Accion published to really share with the audience what was the impact of being part of Catalyst Fund. And Accion was not your sponsoring investor; it was another investor of the committee. So when they came to you, what did they see in terms of the progress you had made through the Catalyst Fund time and beyond when they decided to make an investment in Escala?
Yeah, so through this whole process, we got to meet all of the other investors, not just our sponsor investor, but the other ones. And we clicked really quickly with the Accion Venture Lab team. And they were really interested in what we were doing. Venture Lab has invested in over 40 companies around the globe. And a lot of their investments have been on startups working on credit. And they were really interested in the savings portion of the savings for a purpose. And we started the conversation pretty much when we were part of the cohort. Then the conversation kept going. We were very fortunate to see them in some of the events that we were invited to by the Catalyst Fund, and that definitely got the conversation going. And then one day I just got a call from them, and they say that they're really interested, they want to invest. It really came out of nowhere, which was really exciting.
Nice to get those kind of calls, no?
It was really great. Yeah, it was a Friday afternoon, so it was great. It's a great weekend. Yeah, I feel like it was a relationship that was built over a period of 18 months. It wasn't something like, oh, I'm fundraising and we're gonna go out there and rush all of the processes. It really felt like it was something that they really got to know us. They really got to know what we were doing. They really got to know where we're coming from through all of these interactions with the Catalyst Fund. And so when it came down to making the investment, and and now post investment, it's felt like a just a continuation of that relationship, just getting much closer. So it was really great, and I feel like some other people have seen this, have had some of the same experience after going through this program.
That's right. We're actually proud to say that 4 of our companies have now received investment from members of the committee, but everyone in the cohorts has actually been able to raise funds from external investors or from circle members. So for that, I think it's been a pretty good success rate in that investment readiness proposition. So I'd say we conclude here and see if there's any questions from the audience. You can click on the Q&A button again, and we'll see your questions appear in the chat.
So while we're waiting for some questions to come through, I had a question for Jonathan. Is you have several entrepreneurs in the audience, and so what is some advice that you would give for attendees that are thinking about how to manage their risk and their own journeys?
Ooh.
That's
a big question.
Yeah.
That's a big question. No, I feel like at the beginning you have all of your risks are at high, right? And I feel like as an entrepreneur, when you decide to go entrepreneur full time, you start bringing down some of those risks to a level where you yourself decide to dedicate yourself full time to this mission, let's call it. And then I feel like started talking to, if you're the type of company that is looking to raise money because you want to grow really quickly or because your business plan needs it, then you need to start talking early to investors in order to understand what are some of those risks that they want to see mitigated, so that you can start working towards those risks. Definitely, product market fit is the number one thing that you need to work on. You know, I feel like after you find product market risk, there's a lot of things that you can figure out around scalability, around profitability, around team, a lot of those things. But product market fit is definitely out of the things that you can manage. You know, there's macro risks that sometimes you can't, but out of the ones that you can manage, that's the number one. And then start figuring out all of the other things. And I feel like depending on the investor, they're also you get very aligned with that, and that's why it's key to find the right type of investor that will push you the right way towards solving the right risks at the right time. Because sometimes some investors are looking to solve the profitability issue before the product market fit, or the profitability issue before the scalability risk. And so that's where you start, you know, deviating from, you know, building a high growth, successful company. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. Actually, we have a couple of questions from the audience. First, based on what you just said and your experience in general, how long does it take to become profitable if you're running a digital finance business in a developing country?
Yeah.
$1 million question.
I'd say in developing countries, based on my experience, I know about Latin America and I know a little bit about India. India is definitely less regulated than Latin America. Latin America is highly regulated. So in Latin America, it can take you double the time that it will take you, you know, in a less regulated country like the US or maybe India. So it takes longer. Things just move at a slower pace. Unfortunately, it's a bit frustrated when you come from living in a developed country and you come here and there's so many inefficiencies that it just takes longer. I'd say in general it depends on your business model. Of course, it depends on a lot of things. I feel like for us, it will take us probably like 4 to 5 years to become profitable. And becoming profitable while we're growing exponentially. And so, because that's a question that you just need to ask yourself. We can probably become profitable this year if we wanted to, but we want to grow faster. We want to, be growing, 8 times every year. And so, if we want to do that, then we need to invest, and that takes us to not being profitable again. So it will really depend on the business, but yeah, I haven't seen anyone becoming profitable before that, to be honest.
Got it. And we had another question actually from the audience about social mobility. Like you mentioned earlier that Escala is a product that actually allows you to improve social mobility over time. Can you give them a bit more details on that?
Yeah, of course. So we're savings plans for higher education. And so people save before they go to college. They save a portion of the tuition, and we get their company to pay for part of it, and we get tuition discounts or scholarships to pay the other part of it. And so the social mobility piece is because this is true for Colombia. Once you graduate from college or you have a technical degree, you're more likely to have a higher salary. And so, for example, if someone that goes to college for a technical degree, which is about 2.5 years, they'll be making at least 1.5 or 2 times what they were making before. And if you get a college degree, you're going to be making between 2.5 and 3 times what you were making without that degree. And so in that sense, we're creating social mobility because we're helping people increase their salaries, but not just it becomes a more solid way of earning money, because at least now you have a base, right? Unless you do things that are not very legal, or unless you I don't know, the economy really goes bad, you have now the credentials, and now what you need to do is gain the experience in order to build a career path out of that platform.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jonathan. And we had another also question here. I'm curious to hear also your thoughts on this one, but I'll give my take based on other companies in their portfolio. The question is, does making loan terms longer with more flexible installments to your customers improve repayment rates? Obviously, you're not a credit company, so you don't have direct experience, but we do have other credit companies in our portfolio, such as a company in Sri Lanka called Rukula that offers essentially credit through a network of merchants for consumer durable goods to low-income demographics in Sri Lanka. And they have a policy where the customer doesn't have a specific set amount of time to repay their loans, so the installments are extremely flexible and can be paid off over a very long period of time. In fact, the focus is you just have to repay. It doesn't matter in how short or long of a time, you just have to repay. And they have a repayment ratio around 90% currently, so pretty high. And on average, the payback periods average 9 to 15 months. So it's not like it's unusual also for financial institutions in general. So as of now, in 2017, customers were finishing to repay back in 168 days, but everybody paid back. So with a very high repayment rate. So I hope that answered your question. I don't know, Jonathan, if you want to add anything, if you're familiar with loan companies on your previous life as an investor?
Yeah, I don't think it guarantees the repayment rates. I mean, definitely you need to be your payment amount need to be under a certain percentage of somebody's income in order to ensure that they're able to pay you back. And obviously, so if you make the installments for a longer period of time, that can be decreased. But I don't think, I think you need to work with the amount, you need to work with the period, but I don't feel like there's a definite yes on longer loan terms, making it better for repayment. I think it's even after a certain point, it can actually be, you can be perceived as, the loan that I'll never repay, because
Right.
you'll get into the psyche of somebody so you need to be careful with that as well.
Yeah, and it's very country specific as well.
Right. I was going to add that some of the work we're doing in our other program called Fiber, where we're looking at Paygo Solar, the key to that model where you are basically, it's not necessarily a loan, but it's set up in a way where you are purchasing an asset over a loan-like context. And so what we've seen there is that the flexibility is really important for these customers because of their lumpy income flows, and that the repayment is the potential is there, but there are other factors that play into it, right? It's it's country specific. If it's easy for you to be able to make those payments over mobile money, or not having to travel out to a physical agent to make those payments, that makes a big difference. So you need to think about those on the ground factors as well. We have one more question. It was just about how who's managing the risk at the firm, and who is it? You? Is it someone that's a dedicated risk officer? How do you think about risk management at Escala?
No, we don't have a risk manager. I don't feel like any startup should have a risk manager, because everyone's kind of like focusing on a different risk. It's definitely something that I kind of manage, similar to growth, for example. We don't have a growth manager. We kind of, in a startup, kind of like we're all on that growth team. But definitely different people are looking at things in different ways. So there's a sales team that it's always, being alert around our product market fit, and how can improve that piece continuously. Our ops team is always looking at the execution piece and the scalability risk. And we also have a business development team that it's always looking for new opportunities. How can we, understand our regulation better, understand opportunities that we see in the market, and kind of like work through those risks as well. So, depending on where you are in the business, mitigating different risks become a different priority. But I feel like although you are de-risking the company, there's always some risk, and some will be prioritized higher than others, depending on where you are in the business and the macro situation, etc.
Right.
Right, of course.
Yeah, and so using something like this diagnostic tool, it would make sense to do periodically, right, as a way of monitoring also with the team. We've heard that it would make sense to share with the team or even with investors where they feel comfortable sharing the information. But those numbers are there as a guide, right? You can always look back at the numbers and say, well, that's relevant or not, or within this context, it's not. So I think that's what you need to be able to do outside of the diagnostic, right, is to think about your risks in context. So we're coming up to the end of it. We have a couple of questions that we're not able to answer now as we're wrapping up, but we want to say a big thank you to Jonathan for being a part of today's webinar and sharing his experience. We also want to thank you for attending. And in terms of next steps, encourage you to test out the toolkits. You can go to cftoolkit.org and see the trust toolkit, but also the risk diagnostic. And we have another upcoming toolkit. You can visit our website, catalyst-fund.org/webinars to see the next one. I believe it's in April. And also access the content on our blog. It's where all our learning material is synthesized. So please check that out, as well as our websites and Twitter accounts to learn more about Catalyst Fund.